welcome to Stag Radios podcast Office Hours, where we take a step out of the lecture theatre and into the lives of the lecturers that shape our uni experience. So I'm your host Sofia Varela, and today I am joined with...
I am Professor John Garland, and I am from sociology.
Hey! So just to get started with all of this, what was the first thing that hooked you about your subject? So you said that you did sociology, you've kind of talked about hate crime in the past. What is the reason you got into all of this?
Well, I think it was probably almost pre-university, and probably being a little bit of a sort of political activist, I suppose, originally, as a teenager, and being sort of worried and concerned about, various things in the world. And from then on, I think I always wanted to study societal issues, social sciences. I actually did politics as an undergraduate degree, which was great. But yeah, I was sort of driven, I suppose, by that sort of idea of injustice, trying to repair injustice, sort of naively, I suppose, trying to make the world a better place. And so when it came to actually being employed as a researcher, initially, incredibly, I got employed on a research project looking at racism in football, and this was a long while ago, back in the 1990s. And for me as a football fan, it seemed like the dream job. And amazing, really. I couldn't believe it. I thought all projects were going to be like that, because they're not.
Yeah.
But it was that really, I suppose, the idea that through an industry such as football, you can make, try and challenge racism. And so I became really concerned about those sorts of issues, and also how you develop anti-racist projects. And from then I sort of ballooned from there, really. So then looking at other strands of hate crime, like homophobia or transphobia, and then, just sort of been, I suppose, sort of driven, really. What victims go through is horrible, and I sort of want to help put it right.
Yeah. What would you say is the key aspect of it that was oh my God, what was for example, a project or something that happened to you that really affected you emotionally, and, how did you go about the research for that?
Well, actually, I think, all have, to be honest, in different ways. And I do a lecture on research methods when I talk about a project called the Leicester Hate Crime Project, which is probably still the biggest hate crime victimisation study ever undertaken. And that was hugely impactful. That was about just over 10 years ago, about 12, 13 years ago. It's based in the city of Leicester, and it was looking at all the officially recognised strands of hate crime, plus all of those that seem to bear all the hallmarks of hate crime but don't have specific legislation. And so then you suddenly, you're in a world of victimisation, meeting victims, talking about their life stories, their histories, what it is that they've been through, the impact of being targeted because of who you are. And some of that was brutal, to be honest. It was really hard, incredibly difficult at times to hear, and to cope with. Some of it haunts me a little. It really was, it was horrible. Incredibly emotional. We all found it really draining. And the main researcher, I think, she really had to find ways of coping with hearing all this stuff, on a day-to-day basis for months on end, if you see what I mean. So, that was, obviously, very emotionally impactful. I also did a piece of research prior to that, with my colleague Neil Chakraborty at Leicester, when we were looking at rural racism. And that was an amazing thing. It was so interesting. And for me, being from the country originally, I found the whole sort of village dynamic of that research really interesting. There'd never really been much of a focus on racism in the countryside before. There'd been a lot of research into urban environments, but not a lot about what goes on in the green and pleasant lands of, the English countryside. And doing it with Neil, who's, from a sort of visible minority ethnic community, and me being white, that was really interesting. And just seeing the world a bit through his eyes, if you know what I mean, and learning what it's like to be different in these sort of all-white villages. And then also, it's almost like scratching the veneer of village life, the sort of shiny surface, and finding out underneath that there is, or can be, obviously not everywhere, but we found sort of patterns of exclusion and marginalisation and racism that target there might only be one black family, for example, in the village, but they, the sort of grief that they could get And there was almost like this myth that in the countryside everything was sweet and nothing horrible ever happened.
Yeah.
And that we found that was far from the case with many families, from minoritized communities who lived in the countryside, because villages can have that really almost like closed thing.
Yeah.
You're either part of us and you've lived here for ages, or you're not. And that was emotionally, of course, affecting as well. And seeing what Neil went through. And then at the end, we launched the findings, at the end of sort of project conference. And there were some people afterwards who came up to us who were part of the project, who we'd interviewed, and they were just saying, thank you. No one's ever listened to us before. No one's ever taken our experiences seriously before. And me then as a young researcher, that was like, whoa, hold on a minute. Wow. I can do something that's important or is valuable that people that are the sharp end of this appreciate. And that was an amazing moment, a brilliant moment as well. And a bit of a light bulb moment to thinking, right, this is where I want to take my career from here on.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, honestly, like I just can't even imagine what it was going through those situations. How do you think it kind of differs you mentioned about it being different in the countryside. How do you think it differs from, let's say, somewhere in Leicester to London, for example?
Well, I think is that the sort of process of hate crime, do you think? Or
I think, I don't know, you were talking about how it's like in the towns it's more like close knit, and it's like you're either there or you're a part of us or you're not. Do you think that's kind of the same in like a big city, or do you think it's just more confined to a little town? It's
a really interesting question. There are some differences. I think when we did the rural racism research, we found that it was the sort of lack of substantial, say, minority ethnic communities or Muslim communities or something like that people struggled with. So say if they were targeted, they didn't have the same support networks like you would have, say, in London or in Leicester, when, ethnic minority communities can be large. And instead people felt very isolated and by themselves. And there was nobody to turn to, nobody to help them. They wouldn't even have family nearby. So that was really different. And compared to, say, what we uncovered in the Leicester Hate Crime Project, where at least people did have, sometimes well-built in networks that had been around for a long while, or there were community groups or organisations or charities that helped victims of, racism or, homophobia or something like that. These things were already there. But in the countryside, a lot of the time, they're just not. And so victims, not only are they targeted and they're sort of hurt and impacted, but they've got no one to turn to either. And it's sort of that sense of isolation and being, by yourself, made things sort of worse in some ways.
How do you think it differed? Because you were talking about the ethnic minorities and how that impacted them, and then you talk about the Leicester one. How did they both differ from each other? Because they're both to do with hate crime, but it's obviously not the same strand of hate crime.
No, you're right. I mean, the Leicester one was just bigger. For want of a sort of non-academic phrase, it was. I think we surfaced something like 1,100 victims from all of these different backgrounds, and also conducted interviews and focus groups with another 370 or something to get people's detail and the life stories. And so the Leicester Project, covered all the recognised strands of, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender status, disability, but also things like, alternative subculture status, homelessness, all sorts of other statuses really as well. And we were, trying to look at also communities that didn't get a lot of coverage, like asylum seeker communities or refugees or even Chinese communities that are often sort of left out of this discussion. So it was much, much more holistic. It was, incredibly interesting. And I don't know if you can actually say we enjoyed doing it, but it took you to parts of the city that you'd never been before as well, which was really interesting for lots of different reasons, but also sort of ethically challenging. Because sometimes you felt a bit, you just have to check yourself, is this morally right what I'm doing? Because you would go and interview a victim in a part of the city that was really sort of economically challenged and deprived, that you'd never lived in yourself, because you've got your nice lecturer's job and you live in a nicer part of town, And you feel also like you go in and you sort of dip into somebody's life, you hear their awful experiences, and then you disappear again. And so it did make me feel, all of us, I think, who worked on it, we had to be absolutely sure we were doing it for the right reasons and that we were going to try and make a difference once we'd found, the results.
Yeah.
So there, those things do play on your mind a bit, being a sort of research tourist, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were other challenges as well. We there was a mental health charity that we also visited, people that suffered brain trauma. And again, it's extraordinary to think that you go through that, and that could be through an accident or illness or something, and that's hard enough to cope with, and then you get targeted and abused because of it. It was just incredible, and just sitting there and hearing those stories, again, it was horrible and upsetting, but also sort of quite frightening as well, because we're all potentially disabled.
Yeah.
That can happen to any of us. And for these people, they never thought of themselves even remotely as potentially as being hate crime victims. But then they suffer their brain trauma. They suffer some form of sort of physical or mental disability, and then they get abused for it. So so there's just so many experiences like that involved in that project. But yeah, it's sort of an enriching one as a life experience. It was great, in terms of learning, living. And finding out what it is that people who are different from you go through, which then also makes you reflect on your own position and your own privilege as well. So, that was an incredible project to be involved in.
Yeah. So you mentioned 2 of the challenges there. How do you feel like you kind of try and overcome those challenges? Is it just something that you try and get past? Like, what's your method for getting through it?
Well, great question. And it's really hard, actually. I don't know if I did enough of it.
I think it still stays with you even years later after the projects.
It does. I mean, you try and decompress, do all these sorts of things, talk to your fellow researchers about what it's like, watch the telly, do a bit of sport, something like that, listen to music, all those sorts of things that might help. And they do help to a degree. But it's different from, other forms of research that, I hugely respect. But, for example, if you're researching, Victorian literature, it's probably not the same sort of burden, if you know what I mean. And so there are some experiences that, do haunt me, that I do find really difficult to think about.
We've spoken about kind of the challenges and the negative sides of it. What are maybe some of the positive sides? So you talked about, appreciating your privilege, appreciating your life a lot more. How do you kind of see the success side of your career?
It's a funny one, really, when you think about, what's my career about? What's it for? Why am I doing this? All of
there is an argument that sociology isn't even a subject, and I 100% disagree. I'm like, what? So what would you kind of reply to that?
Well, of course, I think myself more as a criminologist by trade than a sociologist, but they're so interlinked. And of course, I'm in a department of sociology, and they're really, I think they're great disciplines because they're so focused on the world. Criminology especially is really practice-based. It does mean that some people think that it's perhaps, a bit lightweight intellectually, because it's all about trying to affect policy and practice in many ways. But when I think about my own career, that's, a lot of it's been about that, or at least trying to sort of, make victims' lives better. And that's really important. And so, but also there is the academic side as well. So some of the, the publications I've done, I'm really proud of. Myself and the aforementioned Neil Chakraborty wrote a book on hate crime that first came out in 2009, and the second edition came out in 2015. I was really proud of that. I think that's quite good. And also prior to that, myself and a former colleague, Mike Rowe, is now at Northumbria University. I mentioned the Racism in Football project. We produced a book out of that, and that was the first one in that area that ever covered those issues. And even though that was sort of right towards the beginning of my career, and I didn't know as much as I do now, I'm proud of that too, So there is the academic side of just thinking, well, I think that with hate crime, it really helped to open up a sub-discipline that perhaps hadn't been looked at before. And now it's quite a flourishing area of study. And when I started, there was me and Neil and perhaps 1 or 2 others. So I'm proud of that, opening up a new area of research and study. So it's not just about the practical side. Important though that is, I am proud of the academic bits as well.
Yeah. What is kind of like the one either experience, I know we've kind of already spoken about it, but what is like the one experience or project or even a text that really like shaped the way you think and changed the way you think about a certain kind of topic or subject?
I suppose there've been a few. One it was almost like a jolt as well. Was, I mentioned again that racism in football book that myself and Mike Rose did. There was a parallel project going on exactly the same topic at the same time. And we knew the people that were doing it, and two of them were Les Back and John Solomos, who are very famous sociologists. And so myself and Mike at the front end of our careers were quite in awe of them. But there was there was a little bit of competition, I suppose, but it was very friendly.
Yeah.
And they're lovely people. And, I still know John and Les. I see John quite often. And so we had this almost like a competition who was going to get the book out first. We won, right? So our book came out and, it was quite criminological in that it looked at, racism in football from the point of view of how do you police it, what the legislation is like, this sort of thing. Their book then came out and it was so beautifully written.
Yeah.
And I was a bit like, wowzers. And also because that's a really sociological book. So I think there's a whole chapter just describing a day at the football, and it was just, I suppose my lesson was A, wow, there's another way of doing this. And B, those people write well. They were so good. And it's so, you can really learn from people as well. And I think for me, starting out, I learned a lot of lessons. But one is, yes, you can be in competition, but it can be friendly. And so to be still friendly with those people in the rival camp now, I think is, it was really good.
Like our fields are all shifting right now because of either like AI and things like that. How do you think your field specifically is sort of going to change because of perhaps like AI?
I find it disturbing, I must admit. I do, I really do. I mean, it's changed a lot anyway. Hate studies has in the last 20 years or so, because originally, we were, especially before social media, we were really, the study of hate crime was the study of what happened in the tangible world, the real world. And now a lot of research is all about the online environment. AI poses a threat. It sort of doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I'm just getting to grips with ChatGPT myself of having resisted it for a while. And of course, its potential as a research tool is huge. But how it might sort of replace researchers, that worries me, just generally more broadly. And as far as sort of the field of hate studies goes, I think it's more the advent of social media, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, that's really changed how we research hate studies, because so much of hateful and harmful behaviour occurs online, in a way that it just didn't before. When researching it before was almost like knocking on someone's door and going to their house and talking to them about what their life was like in the village, talking and interacting with people. But now, of course, a lot of it is about what's happened on the online world. And so the whole study, the way it's researched, the way you conceive research projects has changed hugely. What people go through, how and where they go through, it's changed. We found in one of the projects, I can't remember which one it was, that people who are victims of online hate can sometimes struggle more than people who experience it, say, in the street. Because in the street, at least you have an idea of who it is that's abused you. Whereas online, they might not have any idea. And then it becomes more frightening to think, who on earth is it? I've got no clue who this person is who's targeting me. So that angle of sort of the perpetration of hate crime is, and researching that has also changed hugely in the last 20 years as well.
How would you say that hate crime differs from online to in real life? I know you gave the example there of being in the street, but I feel like the online thing, it's always been this massive case, you don't know who you're talking to, but how do you think that's changed as years have gone on?
I think a lot of the more extremist groups have moved online or have developed online, again, in a way that they never used to. I was talking to my hate crime students the other day about this, that there was I mean, sometime in the early 90s, there was a demonstration against the British National Party down in somewhere in South London. And of course, it was a physical demonstration. It was people going to, march and protest against the far right. But they did it there because that's where the British National Party had its bookshop, which seems quite quaint now. The idea that the way they got their ideas out was through selling books.
Yeah.
Now, of course, everything is online. And so the way that algorithms spread messages, all this sort of thing, and the way that you can imagine the police and other agencies find it incredibly hard to keep up with, online far right activity, because it just grows and changes and expands, and they can get their message out in a way that was so much harder in a pre-sort of internet age. And I'm thinking of somebody like, Tommy Robinson, who extraordinarily, he's got 1.9 million followers on Twitter or X, 1.9 million. Pre-Twitter, he would have been selling a newspaper or a book or something, this sort of thing, and having much less access to a mass audience. And I think it just really, he's used it well, but yeah, he can get his message out in a way that we never anticipated to huge numbers of people. And so, yeah, that sort of side of things has hugely changed as well, and I think has made somebody like him more powerful than he would have been 30 years ago.
Yeah. Do you think that will have more of an impact than it did, like, say, 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I do. I think you can see it. He had that march in London in September last year, Unite the Kingdom, which had at least 150,000 people on it. And when I researched the English Defence League in sort of 2009 to about 2012, their biggest march was 5,000. And now Tommy Robinson, same person who organised the EDL, organising this demo, and he gets 150,000 at least. How on earth has that happened? And I really do think that the online world, the platforms that he's been given, he was deplatformed for a while from Twitter, and then he was reinstated when Elon Musk took it over. And suddenly, but even over the last year, he's grown by about 1 million followers. 1 million in a year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, way different from how it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. How do you think the police either do deal with hate crime or, should deal with it? Because obviously there are many different types of it. How do they kind of, push themselves to deal with it?
Wow. Not very well. Which is, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there are a lot of, I've come across a lot of police officers in my time, and, I do work outside of, my academic role in the arena of hate crime, work for sort of either working with charities or sitting on local boards that sort of look at how the police have dealt with incidents of hate crime and all that. And I've, interviewed police officers that are involved in hate crime, trying to combat it. And there are a lot of police officers who are really well intentioned and who mean it and who get it. They get the problem. They know it's a serious one. But the issue, I think, there's something to do with police culture that goes back a long while. You think in 1981, Lord Scarman issued a report into the Brixton riots, and he was really looking at the police and their relationship with black communities. And he basically said, look, the police, he didn't think the police were institutionally racist, but there were loads of, rotten apples, individual racist officers in a almost monolithically white organisation. Wind forward until 1999 and the Macpherson report into the police botched investigation of Stephen Lawrence's murder. Macpherson says the police are institutionally racist. So not a lot of change in those 18 years. And then Baroness Casey in 2023, released a very damning report on police culture, in which she basically said they're institutionally, sexist, homophobic and racist. So not a lot has changed between 1999 and 2023. And it feels like banging my head against a brick wall. They just don't change. There's been so many senior officers that have apologised, that have said, things are going to get better, we're going to sort this out. And it doesn't change. It just doesn't change. And so you can understand why minority communities and, which have a huge number of hate crime victims are wary of the police, and why women are wary of the police after the Sarah Everard case. It's that culture, that sort of, I don't know, blokey, almost like inherently masculine, sexist, monolithically almost white, culture that's tinged with homophobia and racism and disableism, all these sorts of things. It just doesn't seem to change. And so I sometimes despair that, and also for the good officers that are trying to do something about this, that there are colleagues that let them down relentlessly. So I don't know, they haven't changed anywhere near as much as they should have done. And there's still too much of a whiff of misogyny and racism and homophobia about the police, and it's just, it doesn't change. So it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. How do you think it differs from, the policing on the outside world to, let's say, in prisons, for example? Because you've said you've sort of done some work interviewing prisoners, is that right to say?
I have,
So how was that sort of experience?
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I did a project, I was really lucky to be part of a project that actually looked at the issue of food in women's prisons, which, for me, I've done quite a lot of work with prisons before, but that had been almost like as an unpaid consultant, just looking at how prisons process the forms that prisoners use if they feel they've been victim of a hate crime in a prison or something like that, or discrimination. But then I got to actually do some proper research, looking at this issue of food in women's prisons, and then you really get an idea of the culture of prisons and how they work. And I had an idea of that before, so I've been inside quite a lot of prisons, and they're amazing places to visit, and they are, some of them horrible, to be honest. I hadn't better name them, but myself and Maria Adams, who ran the Doing Porridge Food in Women's Prisons project, we went to a male prison before Christmas as guests, just to have a look around and sit in some of the meetings, and that prison is horrible. I mean, my God, the cells are smaller than this office. Some of them don't have sanitation, and it was recommended in 1990 that all prison cells should have sanitation, but still there are whole wings that don't. And so being in that environment is extremely challenging. It's fascinating, and I go around with my eyes open, like, wow, like, look at all of this. So, I've been in young offenders institutes, they're incredible. I've been into a prison near Leicester that was, for want of a better phrase, was a murderer's prison, like a really high security prison. The women's prisons are probably better, but again, not all of them. The one near here, HMP Send, is as far as prisons go, is, well, none of them are nice, but that's, you can see all the efforts that, they've got a garden, they've got a little sort of farm type thing, And so meeting prisoners is, again, an extraordinary experience. The things that they've been through, the things that they've done as well, you can't be naive about some of these things. And, you do come across, I don't know, people that have been in prison a long while. Of course, you don't ask them what it is that they've done, but if they've been in for over 20 years, you think, oh, wow, what is this?
Yeah.
And so researching in that environment is amazing, brilliant, challenging. And every time I've been in a prison, I've been so glad to get out,
How do you kind of deal with being in those environments though? Like, what kind of work did you have to do? Maybe not what kind of work, but what was it like when you were in there? And then, like, how did you, like, when you met someone that was, say, in there for 20 years, how did you kind of process that?
All of it is hard, to be honest. And every time I never quite get used to it, going into prisons. Part of that Food in Women's Prisons project involved me being in a prison for a whole day, which I hadn't done before. And then you see the ebb and flow of prison life and how all that works. And that was just fascinating. Instead of being just for a couple of hours, to be in a prison for a whole day is amazing and strange. And of course, some of the women that I met, were, you could tell they were lost, and it makes you wonder what the point and purpose of prison is, and whether some people should ever be anywhere near being incarcerated, because it just seems wrong. Women suffer disproportionately from, all sorts of issues like, violence in the home and things like that, all these things that might trigger their own reaction to that. And so, I met some really interesting people. I did meet someone who I know had been in prison a long while, and she was incredibly charismatic, amazingly so. Like obviously really bright, and I kept thinking, well, what on earth? What have you done? And then I had an idea of what it is they had done, and they were actually quite famous, right? They've been
famous for being in prison.
There've been documentaries about this this prisoner, which I didn't realise before I met them. And so when I met them again, I was like, whoa. I know about you now. And it is it's really disconcerting, because obviously the person that's standing in front of you, and this particular person was barely 5 foot tall, like really little, and you just go, wow, how does that person there relate to the person that did these things? So yes, it does, it's a bit of a mind bender in a way, getting your head around all of this.
What was kind of like one experience that, or a project or something that you thought would go one way and maybe it didn't work out, and how did you kind of progress from it?
I think when I first started out, I remember the very first draft report that I did for my then head of department, and he was a very sort of imposing and intimidating person, and I remember sort of almost like trembling as I went to his office door saying, here's my draft, what do you think? And of course he just red penned it to death and completely just destroyed this piece of work that I'd done. And it was hurtful, of course, but at the time you do think, well, wow, okay, so I'm obviously way off the standards that are needed. And so that was an eye-opener to what was needed and required. Another example was I did an edited football book with a couple of colleagues, and when it came out, it was reviewed in a mainstream football magazine that said, it's an academic piece of work, of course, but it said it was the most boring book on football ever published, which made me laugh. It was also quite hurtful. I don't want to be boring. And then the other one, the actual project, I was involved in the immediate wake of the McPherson report into Stephen Lawrence's murder and the police investigation. Myself and some colleagues at Leicester were commissioned to evaluate the whole new tranche of diversity training that the police were getting, in the wake of all that criticism that they were institutionally racist. Everybody involved with the police, from chief constable through all the ranks, even the cleaners, whatever, had to go on this diversity training. And we managed to land the contract to evaluate this. So, it was a huge thing and massively, highly politically charged at the time. It was one of the biggest issues in the news, police racism, what they're going to do about it. And me and the team, we were all quite young. We may or may not have been a bit out of our depth, right? And we were crushed as well by the politics of it all, and by the fact that obviously some of the police forces we went to evaluate, are powerful. The Home Secretary is powerful, and then there was us caught in the middle of all of this conflict and the rows. And I think we were probably a bit out of our depth. We were just really naive about the politics of it all, how to handle that politics, how to deal with a chief constable, all these people that we were really quite intimidated by. And then I'm not sure we did the research all that well either. So you put all those things together, and I think in the end we sort of just about got there. But had I done that project when I was older, I would have done it better, and I've handled the politics better. So that was bruising. It really was. Some of the experience there were horrible because we were bullied, really. And we couldn't deal with it. So it was, again, life lesson as well, I think.
Just to kind of like round it all off, what would you say to like maybe your younger self? So I know you kind of said that, if I would do this, I would do it better. What would you say to maybe like an undergraduate self or a fresher version of yourself?
Wow. I think I'd say to myself, look, try and see to the horizon, if you know what I mean. Just plan a bit more. Because, I think a lot of things I did when I was an undergraduate, I was just, having fun. I worked hard. I really loved my degree. But I did enjoy myself too. And then I didn't really have a plan about what I wanted to do. And that lasted for quite a lot of my life and still is there to a degree. I never really plan 5 years in advance. You know, some people have like a career plan, like these are my goals for 5 years, these are my goals for 10 years. I've never had that. I've just sort of done it and worked hard and, you know, done my best. But whether that was quite right or not, you know, I might have achieved more, or I might have, I don't know, if I played the career game harder, if you know what I mean. But as it was, you know, a lot of the time you just think, I just need to get to the end of the term, or I need to get to the Easter break, or, you know, because, you know, it can be a difficult job, you know, it's a tough job, you know, sort of hours wise. So yeah, I'd say to my younger self, look, you know, calm down and plan a bit more. You know, you can do this, you can plan sensibly, and don't just live your life sort of week by week, you know.
And one kind of final question, do you have a question for maybe the next lecture that will be on office hours?
Yes, I suppose it would be, if I had a question, it would be, what do you think you've learnt from your colleagues as you've gone through? You know, is there a special colleague or two that you've really found valuable working with and you've learned stuff from?
So thank you so much for joining me on this very special episode of Office Hours. I've been your host, Sofia Varela, and I've been joined with
John Garland from Sociology.
Don't forget to do all the liking and the following and the subscribing and the sharing and all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.